After the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, the Congress of Vienna was convened. The victorious allies met to resettle the affairs of Europe. The Big Four comprised England, Russia, Austria, and Prussia. Among the assembled diplomats, the most outstanding figure was Metternich, the Prime Minister of Austria. He was the guiding force of the Congress and had a chief share in shaping its decisions. He exerted his influence with great success in promoting the interest of Austria and giving a reactionary turn to the policy of the Congress. Tsar Alexander I of Russia was a liberal force, but he was unsteady, being always swayed by contradictory influences. He was eventually converted to Metternich policy. The British representatives were Castlereagh and Wellesley. They exerted a steadying influence and did much to harmonize the conflicting interests of the Allies. The astute French diplomat Talleyrand used with great skill the principle of legitimacy to save France from further territorial spoliation. The chief task of the Congress was to rebuild the state system in Europe, which had been badly disfigured by Napoleon. The Congress of Vienna disregarded national claims, forced unnatural unions, and showed no sympathy for the new forces of liberalism and democracy. The history of the 19th century is mainly concerned with the undoing of the work of the Congress. In Germany, the sentiment of national unity had been awakened by the struggle with Napoleon. The impact of French ideas has stimulated a desire for a free political life. But the Congress of Vienna had completely disappointed Germany. It organized Germany as a loose confederation of 39 states under the presidency of Austria. The confederation was a union of princes, not of peoples. The liberals got neither unity nor political liberty, and so they regarded the Confederation as a great deception of Vienna. The discontent of the liberals found expression in a patriotic demonstration organized by students and professors at Wartburg in 1817. Metternich denounced the movement as revolutionary and secured the passage of a number of decrees, known as the Carlsbad Decrees, by the terrified princes. These decrees strangled all liberal movements throughout Germany for a generation. The Prussian government unconsciously took a step which, by promoting the commercial union of the states, paved the way for their future political unification. In 1818, on the initiative of Prussia, was established the Zollerveien, or Customs Union. By this union, Prussia and the neighboring states were included in under one economic system based upon free trade. By 1850, nearly all the states of Germany, except Austria, joined the union. The political value of the solidarity of economic interests of the German states was very great. It turned eyes from Austria to Prussia. As Metternich once remarked famously, when France sneezes, whole Europe catches cold. France again sneezed in 1848. In 1848, the storm of revolution swept tumultuously over all Germany, and all the states, big and small, felt the impact of the revolutionary earthquake. The German liberals, inspired by the successful revolution in France, made a serious attempt to attain national unity. They summoned something like a national parliament called Wahlparlament at Frankfurt, elected by adult suffrage. It offered the crown of united Germany to the Prussian king, Frederick Wilhelm IV. But to their bitter disappointment, Frederick Wilhelm refused the offer for fear of antagonizing Austria. Subsequently, he on his own initiative tried to set up a federal parliament at Erfurt of all the German states, except Austria, with himself as its president. But the threatening attitude of Austria compelled him to abandon the plan and to accept the humiliating Convention of Olmütz, by which the previous German Confederation, under the presidency of Austria, was restored. With the accession of Wilhelm I, a new epoch opened in the history of Prussia. By training a soldier, he had a soldierly love for direct methods, practical issues and firm resolves. The tradition of Prussia was militaristic, and Wilhelm believed that the destiny of Prussia was bound up with her army. In the general elections of 1861, the liberals or progressives swept the polls, and the new Prussian Diet rejected the army proposals with an overwhelming majority. As a last resort, the king, on the advice of War Minister Van Roon, sent for Otto von Bismarck. He was appointed minister-president in 1862, and with that appointment began a new chapter in the history of Prussia. Bismarck rode roughshod over the Prussian Diet and continued to levy and collect taxes without parliamentary grants, and fully carried out the military reforms. In words that have become classic, he clarified his viewpoint and said, "Not by speeches and resolution of the majority, the great questions of the days be decided by blood and iron." Prussia would not be able to assume the leadership of Germany as long as there was Austria to thwart her projects. Hence Austria must go. As she would not go voluntarily, war was necessary. This was the inescapable conclusion of Bismarck, and he was determined to act upon it. While engaged at the home front, Bismarck was concurrently pursuing his great diplomatic schemes abroad. He realized the necessity of securing the friendship of the neighboring powers if he was to succeed in his plan of expelling Austria from the German Confederation. He began by courting friendship of Napoleon III of France and concluded commercial treaty with it, giving her favorable terms. Similarly, he supported Tsar of Russia when revolt broke out in Russian Poland and secured the goodwill of Russia. With difficulty, he dissuaded the Prussian king not to attend Congress of German princes, summoned by Austria. The opening of the obscure and complicated question of Schleswig and Holstein provided an opportunity to Bismarck to use its complications to aggrandize Prussia. The two duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, forming the southern half of the peninsula of Jutland, have long been unified with Denmark by bonds of personal union. The King of Denmark was also the Duke of the two duchies, but they retained their separate law and institutions. In 1863, a new King Christian IX ascended the Danish throne. Under pressure from nationalists, he published a new constitution. It organically incorporated Schleswig with Denmark and bound Holstein with closer ties. There was a loud protest in the duchies as well as Germany. Bismarck got a splendid opportunity to fish in the troubled waters. It was his secret object that the duchies should go neither to Denmark nor to Duke of Augustenburg, whose claim the Federal Diet supported. He persuaded Austria to make a common cause against Denmark, independent of the Federal Diet. Both powers served an ultimatum on Denmark to repeal the constitution. On Denmark's refusal, Austria and Prussia declared war and quickly defeated her. By the Treaty of Vienna, which followed, Denmark renounced her claim to the two duchies and agreed to recognize any arrangement made by Austria and Prussia. The sequel to the Danish War was turned to be what Bismarck anticipated. The victors could not agree as to the disposition of spoils. A conflict seemed imminent, and this was what Bismarck wanted. But as his diplomatic preparation was not as yet ready, he arranged a temporary compromise. By the Convention of Gastein, Austria was to occupy Schleswig and Prussia-Holstein, pending a final settlement. The question of duchies should not be brought before the Federal Diet. It was a great diplomatic triumph. By giving Holstein, which was encircled by Prussian territory, it gave Bismarck a splendid opportunity to engineer an irritating plot against Austria. The Gastein arrangements contained many seeds of discord. Austria had no intention of keeping Holstein sandwiched between Prussian territory. Hence she began to encourage the claims of the Duke of Augustenburg. Austria also announced her intention of referring the whole question to the Federal Diet. This attitude amounted to a violation of the convention. It gave an excellent opportunity to Bismarck of accusing Austria of ill faith. Bismarck made an alliance with Italy and promised them Venetia if the war was successful. In a meeting with France's Napoleon III at Biarritz, Bismarck also made vague promises of future compensation for France if they did not get themselves involved in the war on Austria's side. He was ensuring that Austria was completely isolated and had no allies to turn to once the attack began. Having isolated Austria diplomatically, Bismarck proceeded to overcome the opposition of the Prussian king. Wilhelm I regarded any war with Austria as fratricidal. Bismarck educated the king on the necessity of the course of action he was determined to take. In 1866, Bismarck provoked Austria into war by proposing the reform of the German Confederation on the basis of universal suffrage, with Austria excluded. By shifting the ground of dispute, he hoodwinked the powers and averted their intervention. Naturally, Austria rejected the proposal and prevailed upon the Federal Diet to mobilize the federal forces to punish Prussia. Thereupon Prussia seceded from the Confederation and declared war upon Austria, appearing to take up arms in self-defense. The war was of surprisingly short duration and came to be called 7 Weeks' War. Austria was supported by Bavaria, Saxony, and almost all the minor German states. Prussia struck with amazing swiftness. It crushed the smaller German states in 2 weeks, then made the converging attack on Austria and obtained an overwhelming victory at Sadowa or Königgrätz at the Bohemian Plain. Austria appealed to Napoleon III. Bismarck, fearing the intervention of the powers, pressed for speedy negotiations. He overruled the king's desire to march upon Vienna. By the Treaty of Prague in 1866, Austria accepted exclusion from Germany, consented to the dissolution of the German Confederation, ceded Venetia to Italy and her share of Schleswig-Holstein to Prussia, agreed to recognize any reconstruction of Germany to be made by Prussia, Schleswig-Holstein and some of the hostile states of the north, such as Hanover, Nassau, and the Free City of Frankfurt, were outright annexed to Prussia. As a result, Prussian territory, till now scattered, became a continuous stretch running across North Germany. All the other states, north of River Main, were organized in a new confederation with the Prussian king as the president. A federal council, called Bundesrat, was set up, to which different states were to send delegates. A popular assembly, or Reichstag, was to be chosen directly by the people. Germany was partially unified under the dominant leadership of Prussia. After the consolidation of North Germany, it was the task of Bismarck to bring the southern states within the orbit of Prussian influence. The greatest obstacle in this way was France. For centuries, France had deliberately pursued the policy to keep Germany weak and disunited, to assure her own continental supremacy. That was why Bismarck wrote in his memoirs, "A war with France lay in the logic of history." Such a war would arouse patriotic feelings among the southern states. They would unite in a struggle against a traditional enemy. To France, a swift triumph of Prussia was a disagreeable surprise. She had expected a long drawn-out battle that would have allowed France to act as arbiter of Central Europe. Sadowa had upset the traditional policy of France in Germany. It was felt that it was France that was beaten at Sadowa, The collapse of Napoleon III's Mexican enterprise and German happenings weakened his position at home and lowered France's prestige abroad. He began to put forward claims for territorial compensation to offset the increase in power of Prussia, as per the idea of balance of power. He flitted from one proposal to another. The failure of Napoleon III's attempts to secure compensation lashed the temper of the French people to fury. They talked of revenging Sadowa. The Prussians regarded demand for compensation as outrageous interference with Germany's national right to development. Convinced that a war with France was inevitable, Bismarck took care to isolate France diplomatically. Russia has not forgotten France's role in the Crimean War, nor her efforts on behalf of the rebellious Poles. Bismarck improved good relations by encouraging Russian design on Turkey and consenting to the repudiation of Black Sea clauses of the Treaty of Paris of 1856. He has also secured the goodwill of Austria by treating her with great leniency after Sadowa. He retained the friendship of Italy by holding out to her the prospect of acquiring Rome, where the position of the Pope was defended by French troops. The pretext for war was provided by the incident in Spain. The Spanish people rose in revolt and expelled their Bourbon queen, Isabella. The crown was offered to Prince Leopold of Hohenzollern, a relative of the King of Prussia. It caused great indignation in France. Leopold withdrew his acceptance of the crown. Not satisfied, Napoleon III demanded from the King of Prussia an assurance that he would never allow a renewal of Leopold's candidature in the future. This demand the king refused. Bismarck made unscrupulous use of this incident. He received a telegram from the king, giving an account of meeting with the French ambassador at Ems. He altered the telegram and published it, so as to convey the impression that the French ambassador had been insulted by the king. This fled the French indignation, and France declared war on Prussia in 1870. France hoped that the southern German states would side with her. But on learning that France desired compensation at the expense of German territory, they made a common cause with Prussia. For the first time in centuries, a united Germany marched out to meet the hereditary enemy. At Sedan, Napoleon III with 20,000 soldiers surrendered to the Crown Prince of Prussia. After Sedan, the victorious army marched to Paris. After 5 months of heroic resistance, the city capitulated. The Treaty of Frankfurt closed the war in 1871. The most important consequence of the war was the unification of Germany and the creation of a strong German empire. In the royal palace of Versailles, King Wilhelm of Prussia was proclaimed German emperor. Germany, from being the weakest state in Europe, suddenly sprang to the front as the strongest military and political power on the continent.